Now, next to discuss MiCA, or what's happening over across the ocean in the US, the Clarity Act, the Genius Act, we are having a wonderful panel entitled EU versus the US, the regulatory gap, and it's moderated by Emma Joyce, CRO, and head of EMEA at GBBC, and a wonderful panel of guests. Everyone put your hands together and welcome them on stage. Thank you.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. As you heard, we will be talking about the regulatory gap, or if there is a gap, between the EU and US. I'm really excited to be joined with an incredibly esteemed panel. Before we get into the conversations, I'm going to ask them all to introduce themselves, please.
Thank you. I'm Stéphanie Cabossioras. I'm the Chief Strategy and Global Policy Officer at Société Générale Forge. Société Générale Forge is a subsidiary of the bank, Société Générale, and we are issuers of stablecoins, a euro version and a dollar version, both compliant with MiCA.
Hi everyone, thank you for having me. I'm Dr. Lisa Cameron. I was an MP in the UK Parliament House of Commons for 9 years, and during that time chaired the very first cryptocurrency digital assets group. I now am the chair of the UKUS Crypto Alliance, and we engage and collaborate between the UK Parliament and the US Senate and Congress, bringing parliamentarians to the UK to speak about regulation and progress, and also bringing the legislators across to the US. Didn't start in tech. I was the first psychologist in our parliament to be elected, and I think our learning from that is that all parliaments need a psychologist. So, so I was there for some time. Thank you.
Very difficult to follow from that. Very good afternoon, and Emma, thank you for having me. My name is Iana. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of OpenPayd. OpenPayd is an infrastructure provider, a payments infrastructure provider. We help businesses move and manage money globally. We service most of the names that you see here on the floor, from very large exchanges to liquidity providers and other trading platforms. And I'm a lawyer by background, prior to becoming the manager of OpenPayd, so particularly excited to discuss the topic of regulation across the Atlantic today.
Also, thanks for having me. I'm Néstor Palao, head of the LT and corporate clients at Sygnum Bank. Sygnum is a fully regulated Swiss bank. We are proud to be the first fully regulated crypto bank in the industry. We support from crypto foundations, startups, to also institutions like funds, hedge funds, to even banks enter this industry in a fully regulated way, offering them custody, trading, loans, and different solutions in the industry.
And I'm Ambroise. I'm the country manager of Bybit in France. Bybit is regulated in Europe through our MiCA entity in Vienna, Austria, pretty much for a year now. And so we are very at the forefront of how we can apply new regulation and how we can make it beneficiary for our users. So very happy to be here.
Wonderful, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today. Iana, can I start with you, please? Why is this conversation so important right now?
The difficult question. Emma, I guess we have been sitting on this stage for the past couple of years now and discussing blockchain technology, discussing crypto, Bitcoin even prior to that. And it has always been in the context of how can we drive adoption, because adoption is important for economic growth. Now, that agenda is still very much there, but I think the reason why today's conversation is so important is because we live in a different world. We now see that the geopolitical pressures are reshaping the global map and the way that global trade and global capital is moving. And this is why I think it is important for all stakeholders that we have here, from businesses, from infrastructure providers, government, policymakers, to recognize that the underlying infrastructure is now not just a driver for economic growth and development, but equally becomes absolutely critical from a policy-making perspective, so monetary policy, payments policy, and ultimately really touching on the subject of national sovereignty and national security. So the reason why this conversation is so important, and especially the conversation about regulation and the regulatory arbitrage between the different jurisdictions, is because it is going to touch security, it is going to touch sovereignty, and as a result, the daily life of every single citizen, irrespective of whether you have to do anything with this industry or not.
Thank you. Any other thoughts on why it's important right now?
Sygnum got its full banking license in the second half of 2019, and I remember still at that time we were all saying institutions are coming, institutions are coming. I keep seeing the same every year at every conference, but it feels really, we like to say that this year we saw the RFP summer where the largest number of banks approach us to offer digital assets to their clients. And it seems that now the harmonization of rules across EU, across the US is helping them really have the clear set of guidelines and in the past required and applied for all their activities. Now they see that the same is coming for digital assets and helps them, paves the way for them to access this industry.
Yeah, I think it's also really important for the policymakers to realize that this industry is global and that for instance, those in the UK Parliament need to have an appreciation of the regulatory progress that's happened with MiCA, for instance, in the EU, that's also happening in the US at a super fast pace with the Genius Act and following on potentially the Clarity Act coming through, and what that means in terms of international collaboration, but also in terms of competitiveness. So I think it's very, very important. And I think it also helps to solidify the industry internationally. You know, a few years ago we had these conversations and policymakers would say, this is just a fad and we don't have to do this. I think now, with what's happened in the US, industry and traditional finance also realize that this industry is here to stay, and therefore that we need to have regulatory clarity in order to pave the way for progress. We had the Children's Parliament also come to speak to us, and they said that digital technology was very key to their future. In fact, when one of the questions was, who has heard of Web3? We had the MPs and the children aged 9 to 15 and the Lords in the room. Hardly any Lords had their hands up. Very few MPs, and all the children understood what Web3 was. So they're digitally native. This industry is here to stay, and actually the next generation need the skills and opportunities it's going to bring.
Yeah, and I think we are seeing a lot more collaboration going forward between what we call the crypto industry and what we called at the time the TradFi. There is something, and I believe that we are really in a pivotal moment, 1 year after MiCA, where everyone starts to collaborate with each other. And I think regulation in that sense in Europe is a real enabler for businesses to go on-chain. And for crypto company also to grow through more institutional channels. So I guess for the future, it's quite bright, thanks to that.
And on the difference between EU and US, and why it's important now to discuss that, I would say that the big difference is that in Europe we have the regulation, but we don't have the strategy yet. And in the US, it's the contrary. They have the strategy, but they don't have fully the regulation. They have the strategy because the White House issued a report last July stating very clearly what is the objective of the US government is first to move all the capital markets on-chain, on the blockchain, and second, to ensure the leadership of American companies on this new technology. But the US don't have the regulation yet. The Genius Act was adopted in Congress, but it's not implemented because they are all implementation acts that need to be drafted and enforced. The Clarity Act on crypto assets is not adopted at Congress. And on Europe, it's the contrary. We have already the regulatory framework for now many years. We have MiCA, which regulates stablecoins and crypto asset service providing. We have the EU pilot regime, which enables to do secondary market fully on blockchain, fully with tokenized securities and a tokenized cash leg. But we don't have the strategy. We don't have an harmonized strategy to say, as Europeans, we see the world going in this direction, we see the financial industry going in this direction, and our objective is to go there. And this, I hope, will be done, is currently being done at European level, and especially at the Eurogroup.
I think what Stephanie described is really to the point, meaning that we have a lot of different regulation that we need to follow in order to propose our product to the users. And so in the case of MiCA, MiCA is limited to the crypto space. But the market is evolving, and what was true 4 years ago, meaning that people want one platform for trading stocks, one for crypto, one for everything else, this is shifting. And for and so we have a regulation that maybe now requires us to get a stack of different licenses so we can get to a point where we can offer what our user needs. And this is where a better improved strategy at European level is important, because if we don't get that, the risk is real that user will just turn on their VPN and choose a solution not regulated that will suit their needs. So this is where I think we have some learnings to take.
Totally agree. And Stephanie, I love that point actually about, having one jurisdiction having the regulation but not the strategy, and the opposite being true in the US. Bearing in mind, I do have a lot of conversations actually. I don't think many people realize that. Well, I'm sure many do, but not all, that the regulation isn't there in the US yet. It's not been done yet. So but given the size and influence of the US and that the strategy is there, do jurisdictions like the EU and the UK risk falling behind if the US can get it done quickly, or not?
No, I think we are still in the game. We already have, at least in Europe, all the regulatory framework. We have big international players getting licensed, being implanted in Europe. We have also, I would say, European champions. We have stablecoin issuers. We have traditional market infrastructures starting to move on blockchain. So I would say the challenge now for Europe is really now to develop business. We have the regulatory framework. We know how to do business. A lot of things are enabled. And as you are saying, Ambroise, it's possible in Europe, even from traditional financial institutions, to develop business on blockchain. It's possible. The regulatory framework is there. So now we need to move a step forward and start integrating all that into the banking system, into the financial system. And the starting point, really the first door to open is going through stablecoins. Why? Because it's cash. And if we want to develop a financial industry, at the core of this industry, it's movement of cash. And that's why at Société Générale Forge, we had the project to develop this stablecoin, because we started 6 years ago by tokenizing bonds, because it was the only asset that was regulated at that time. But there's no market for tokenized bonds if you don't have the cash leg on blockchain. And what is the only cash on blockchain that exists today, that existed at that time and that exists today? It's stablecoins. And so that's why we need to start integrating these stablecoins in all the financial industry, in banks, in market infrastructures, in trading venues, in settlement systems, because it will be the first door to start transforming the whole financial industry.
And if I may just add to both points that were made earlier, I actually believe that Europe is very well positioned to drive now innovation, because although there has been a lot of criticism insofar as MiCA is concerned, there is an aspect of convergence of the different regulations. So the point Ambroise made, that if you want to offer a full suite of services through an application to your consumers, you're most likely now required to be both MiCA regulated, e-money regulated, regulated for money transfers, etc., etc.
And MiFID.
And MiFID, exactly right. But because the regulatory framework is already very well developed, so whether you take MiFID, whether you take e-money and passporting across the EU, and then you just put the layer on top in terms of the stable coins, the MiCA regime, then you actually get to a set of rules that are all aiming at some very clear objectives when it comes to operational resilience, when it comes to consumer protection, when it comes to building trust. And there is that convergence. And we now see this with a few very clear examples. For example, if you wanted to do stable coin payments, you wanted to do third-party payments, you can't be just a MiCA regulated firm. You also have to have the PSD2, PSD3 interplay in terms of enhancements to your licenses. So I guess this is just to say that we have a level of maturity in terms of European payments regulation and crypto stablecoin regulation that is actually giving companies the opportunity to access a significant market in a harmonized way, both from a regulatory and technical standard perspective. And that is a significant advantage that is not to be underestimated, because when you look at the US landscape, yes, the strategy is absolutely there, but there is still both Genius Clarity Acts, they're, I would argue, very far off from getting adopted. And the second thing is you also have to consider the state-by-state fragmentation, which doesn't make life easier. And then you overlay the MTLs that, again, you need to go on and get on a state-by-state basis. It becomes a lot more complex, a lot more expensive and time-consuming.
Yeah, so not as easy as it looks.
Now, I think, I think, you know, what we've been discussing emphasizes, and I agree with Stephanie, that having the strategy is very, very important. And I think that's why we should really be doubling down on engaging with regulators, engaging with policymakers. And we've been doing a huge amount of that work in the US, bringing expertise over to the UK Parliament for roundtables, and similarly last year I had a roundtable in the European Parliament, one in the Spanish Senate, and I remember across all of the parliaments the members saying, we just don't have enough information about this. So please do, I think, as companies and as businesses who want to engage, make sure you are engaging with the regulators, with the parliaments, the policymakers, in order that we can get this strategy clear both in Europe for moving forward, but also for the UK, because the leadership and the guidance and the political direction is very, very important in terms of harnessing the momentum. And I think that's what we saw in the US, that there was a momentum built because of political strong leadership and direction. Also, when you do engage with policymakers, please don't use all of the jargon. It's very confusing, you know. We had people coming speaking about CeFi and DeFi and Bitcoin and blockchain, and I remember then someone mentioned fiat, and one of the lords said, fiat, that's a car. I understand what you're talking about now. So we need to maybe speak in clear communication with the different sectors and make sure that this industry has a place at the table in the parliamentary settings.
Matthias.
Yes, just building up on what my colleagues said, to add the perspective of what we see in our own case and what we see with clients. Probably we are biased by our location in Switzerland, but we see that the perception is that MiCA is perceived as a very strong move from Europe and is here to stay, while the perception is that in the US is more politically driven, so there is no assurance that this will only last for one term, and in a couple of years all disappear, because we saw what was before and was probably 180 degrees. Second, probably the biggest advancement has been the treatment of tokens as non-securities, but in reality, beyond stable coins with the Genius Act, there has been not much more in terms of regulatory clarity on banks, on tokens. So the perception is that Europe moves slow, but is bold and here to stay, has set up a solid framework ahead. There's still big challenges, and I think we will cover that later. But the US seems more volatile, and you know, it provides a certain roadmap, but so far it's been stable coins and not much more.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, that things could change very quickly, couldn't they? Ambroise, thinking about MiCA, how are you experiencing MiCA and regulation in practice?
That's a really broad question. Now, overall, I think our angle is that we welcome regulation as a way to cater for a greater amount of people needs. So currently, if you take a look at all the studies about crypto adoption, crypto is very, very well known. Like 90% of the population knows about Bitcoin, knows about crypto, very good. When it comes to the ownership part, it's still, there is still work to be done, 11%. And so, 11% of the French population, for example, is actively holding crypto in their assets, which is a good number, but hasn't evolved that much. How do we see MiCA? MiCA is just a way for us to operate at a European level and offer the same sets of products and services to our customers across Europe, which is for a company very important, because the size, the cost of regulation and everything, it needs to be spread out in different countries, otherwise you get drawn into those costs. Yeah, I guess now the time is for us to think as a company how we bridge that gap, how we open crypto to everyone. And opening crypto to everyone means also adapting our product to a more cautious audience. We come from a company where volatility was the main driver in terms of our user base. Europe is more driven by yield. And so now our challenge is to build a product that suits those users. Yield-oriented, long-term oriented, where a user we're going to buy crypto, hold it for a long time. And so MiCA is an enabler and gets us to work on our basis so that we can succeed in Europe with a product that is very suitable for the European people.
Thank you.
I mean, we, for example, at OpenPayd, we see it from the viewpoint of an infrastructure provider that services a lot of the players that are now regulated under that new regime. And I guess there are two aspects. There are definitely obvious advantages that have been brought in, because we have seen the level of maturity of those businesses improve significantly over the course of the past 24 months in order to meet the operational resilience requirements, data protection, reserves, accounting, if you will, safeguarding of client funds. Because Ambroise made an excellent point. It's about trust. It's about servicing a cautious consumer. And from that standpoint, the regulation is helping build that trust and helping companies demonstrate that they are meeting a certain set of criteria, and as a result they're safe. They're safe for the everyday user to interact with. On the other hand, what we've experienced, however, is there is still a lack of full harmonization or full transposition adoption across all member states, and this is hurting companies. Hungary is a great example. So for legislation there local legislation has not been transposed, so we don't have an efficient application of the regulation, which poses a challenge both for the companies that operate outside of that country, as in within country, as well as for infrastructure providers that support businesses on a cross-border basis. So in a nutshell, Great progress has been made over the past 36 months, and this is a very welcome development, giving security, giving certainty and sustainability, but there is still more work to be done on a national level to ensure that there are no gaps from one country to another.
Thank you.
There are also some topics in MiCA that are not maybe totally covered. There's the question of the equivalence regime. So currently, if a stablecoin issuer is based in Europe and wants to develop in other countries, he needs to be registered several times everywhere with not necessarily the same regulatory regime. And it's not the case in traditional finance. In traditional finance, we have equivalence regime. So if we are licensed in one jurisdiction in Europe, we can also operate in the US. So it's something that maybe we should include in MiCA. There's a question of multi-issuance. You know that stablecoins are global. They are multi-issued. There is one stablecoin that can be used all around the world, and it's really the purpose of stablecoin to do instant 24/7 cross-border payments. So we absolutely need to secure that in the text in MiCA. And there's a big question of yield. So you mentioned it. It's important when the investors hold an asset, they want it to generate yield. And we absolutely need in Europe to have a level playing field with the US, because in the US, this question of remuneration of stablecoin is not clear yet. It's not totally settled, but at least in the text of the Genius Act, it's said that it's not possible to give direct yield to holders, but it's possible to give indirect yield to holders through crypto platforms. So, and in Europe, it's totally forbidden. So we absolutely need to have an equivalence between the two obligations to make sure that European stablecoin can compete globally.
I totally agree with that, and I think working on those issues is going to be very vital for the future. This is a global industry, and there have to be, global standards and this interoperability. We're working just now very hard between the UK and the US on the UK-US joint digital sandbox, where companies can, from the UK, enter the sandbox and have passporting rights to the US. And I think this will happen as well for other jurisdictions like the EU moving forward. I think it has to, and once again, I think that's why these venues are so important. Paris Blockchain Week has been so important. We have to make sure that we're all working together in terms of making this possible. And the financial inclusion that this industry gives internationally to people who have been excluded from the banking system as well previously, I think is, something that's of immediate interest to policymakers, and also I've been doing some work with Bybit and Blockchain for Good on social impact use cases. The members of Parliament want to hear about how this sector is going to change lives. So yes, about economic growth, but also about how are you going to impact people's lives and make a difference.
Yeah, and I think both your points are very right. Like right now, being able to grant interest on stablecoin is also a way for users to protect themselves from inflation. And we are in a growing geopolitical uncertainty, and the stability that we knew in the past is now over, I would say, or at least for the time being. And being able to offer the user a way to protect themselves against this inflation that they cannot master at all is very important. So it would foster our adoption, the adoption of crypto. Definitely, I would say that we can grant some interest out of the stable coins. The real point is how it would benefit the end user. So I guess still by protecting them, which is very important, there is progress to be made in that sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with that. Matthias, when thinking about what should companies and entrepreneurs think about when they're choosing where to build and scale?
we chose Switzerland because our mandate was to provide digital asset solutions to clients in a fully regulated environment, and initially considered that Switzerland was the only jurisdiction back in 2017 to 2019 that could offer that security. It's clear now that the industry has developed further. Still clearly believe that Switzerland has remained as the first jurisdiction in providing such legal clarity, but also building the environment that provides assurance to projects, or even having service providers, fully regulated banks that understand the industry, legal providers, accounting firms, audit firms that can support you and that have that knowledge. And that's, in other jurisdictions, that will come in the coming years, but that's still an issue. It depends. If your business is hyper-regulated, sort of, or involves, let's say, money intermediation, certainly regulation development is an important factor to consider when establishing your venture, where to establish. If not, basically, probably speed is a factor in other components.
Three main things to consider: access to talent, access to capital, and regulatory certainty. And I guess I speak here as a regulated financial institution that's headquartered in London, but also supervised here by the ACPR in France, and passported across all of Europe. And I can safely say that when you look at the three categories of talent, capital, and regulatory certainty, Europe and the UK, and I speak Europe and the UK combined, are still ranking very highly when it comes to both access to talent as well as regulatory security and clarity and sustainability. So Europe remains a great place to definitely start up a business. Now, when it comes to the scale-up phase and the capital needs that a scale-up requires, there is obviously a big debate as to why is capital always inbound capital requests coming from the US, and what about the risk appetite in mainland Europe? Do we not need to tweak that in order to place more bets and support more startups? But definitely, if you're starting a venture now, the access to regulators through trade associations, I mean, yourself and your association as well, is giving you a great opportunity to actually get the right level of information, get the right level of support, the right level even of capital at the very beginning to actually start up and develop an idea. So these would be the three factors from my perspective.
And I think the talent is very, very important as well. We're working together with Bitcoin industry as well to develop Bitcoin Policy Institute interns into the UK Parliament, where they can have experience in the office of members of Parliament, members of the House of Lords, hopefully to help the transition of those people back into industry then with some policy experience, and also to transmit some knowledge and expertise from this sector into the Parliament as well, as part of our ongoing education programmes. So I think, there are fantastic university courses in Europe, in the UK. We have a huge amount of talent, and we need to kind of harness that as well. The one caveat I would say is, many of the companies tell me it's still very difficult to scale up in the UK. So I think we have to overcome these barriers, because otherwise we develop the talent, then the talent leaves to other jurisdictions.
Absolutely. And sort of sticking with that theme, I know we've only got 4 minutes left, so some very quick thoughts on what do you think may need to change in Europe to continue to attract and retain innovation? Any thoughts?
I would start with changes in regulation to ensure that capital and the right level of capital is committed to European startups and scale-ups. Definitely, it is the right capital at the right step of the journey of the scaling of a business that is missing in Europe, and which is why companies are often going and seeking that capital elsewhere, whether to the US or Middle East and Asia.
For me, if we want to develop blockchain generally in finance, there's one little thing to do, very easy. Every bank should open wallets for itself and for its clients. When we have wallets, we can do anything on blockchain. And today it's not the case. And this is a blocker. We have the regulation, we have everything we need, but just we need to build the infrastructure inside the financial industry, open wallets, and start putting stable coins, crypto assets, tokenized securities, tokenized market funds, etc., etc.
Yeah, I would say come and engage in the educational programs that we're running in the parliaments. Be the companies who engage with policymakers. Make sure that you have that seat at the table. And because often, you know, we're dealing with people who are very rooted in traditional finance. Traditional finance industry is in and out of our parliaments very regularly. And you're kind of still seen as the new kids on the block. So, you know, when I started, people would say to me, oh, that industry is full of cowboys. I took, you know, great efforts to tell everyone that it wasn't full of cowboys, and then with horror one day I went down to meet someone to show them around the parliament from the industry who was actually dressed as a cowboy, wearing a cowboy hat and a big pair of cowboy boots. But it was all resolved at the end of the day because people said, oh, Lisa Cameron was there with Kid Rock today in the parliament, so it was fine. I let them have their misperception.
I wish for more speed. I think we set the right stones, and probably I want to believe we did the most difficult part, which is getting 20 plus countries together to understand there is a need for regulation for digital assets and then set the next steps. There are also things coming, the harmonization of the AML regulation in 2027 as well, that will help in that regard, but probably speed is what we all wish for. But from a positive perspective, when interacting with the regulator, we see that they understand at least the initial steps that want to be taken. So the right steps are being taken, but we wish for more speed.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that it's been a year now. MiCA will come in full force in June. I believe that the thing that might have been overseen is the future of the crypto ecosystem in Europe with those new regulation coming up. And I believe that maybe we can, or regulators can think about ways of protecting what the crypto ecosystem seen in Europe, which risks to not being able to comply with the entire sets of different compliance requirements, not because they don't want it, but because the requirement is so high that not all companies can cover for it. So yeah.
Thank you so much for that discussion. I think it's a really positive discussion on what is happening in Europe and how it's absolutely moving in the right direction. More speed needed, more harmonization, but definitely getting there, and more wallets, for sure. Thank you so much to my panel. I really enjoyed that conversation. Thank you to you all, and enjoy the rest of the day.
Welcome to Signal Week.